Hi, Sophie.
Hey, Kiana, you must be exhausted.
I made sure to actually give myself breaks this time.
Oh, good
So
for you.
I'm not too bad,
Yeah.
but I've been snacking on this all day.
What is it? Trader Joe's Trex Mix. Yay.
So freaking good. It's
Oh, the
so
best.
good.
Yeah. It's so good that it's not a meal. I hope you had a proper meal. Oh, Kiana, you're frozen for me. I wonder if that's on my end. Hold on for a second. Kiana, can you hear me? Oh, dear. Hello? Hey, Kiana? Hey, I don't know what happened. I was
My
looking at
computer
your.
decided to update.
Oh,
And it just automatically did it. Like that
okay.
was nice of it. It was
Right. I
so
thought,
thoughtful.
okay, I thought it was on my end. Somehow I was doing something wrong. I
No,
was
fortunately it was quick.
okay. Well, let me ask you something, right? Before I get into this, I know there's some people who wanted a recording of this presentation. I did make some tweaks on the slideshow, but a lot of it is covering the same thing that if you've already seen the slideshow, I kind of go over it. Obviously, we can talk about it too, but maybe there's some things that in particular you were concerned about that I can really target or you know the reason why I'm talking about this partly is a kind of a reminder of yes, you can record things online and give feedback on oral communication. We
Mhm.
haven't got a lot of requests for that sort of thing. But I know, for example, AJ, who's supporting marketing, they're going to do a lot of oral presentations. So
Mhm.
we'll see. Com 101, they're going to be sending students, but they're doing like live in person. So we really have to start making that distinction between like in person presentations.
Yeah.
And, the expectations of in person presentations are quite different from expectations for online presentation,
Yeah.
right? Where there's less body and more about, maybe I'd say more about the slide almost,
Mhm.
right? But I don't know. I mean, what was your experience so far within the last year in terms of the kind of presentations, if you had any, that you had to
Yeah. I didn't have a lot. I think really it just had to do with how people were presenting. Some
mm-hmm,
people were really good at their slides. They made great slides and they just wanted some
mm-hmm,
tips on like how to make them better.
mm-hmm.
Some people were like, I have absolutely nowhere to start. So a lot of the times it was how to make slides, like you were kind of saying. Um, but I think it's just a matter of I think because I've so I didn't always used to be so outspoken as I am now. When I was younger, I was very not I'm very much not outspoken. Confidence. So I want to just go over, I feel like I just want to go over the tips again so that I can then look at how do I give them confidence to to do the presentation. And because honestly, that's really what it is. It's just like fake it till you make it, right? Even if you don't have the confidence, you just do it. But it's that, but it's also planning, and it's practicing, and it's all those things. So I think it's just a matter of, I don't know, I just wanted like a refresher of like, how do I make sure I'm communicating to them to my best of my ability, that how to do it. I don't know. I really just wanted to be like, okay, how do I communicate to them how to make
Yeah.
it the best that they can
Yeah.
be.
Yeah, well, the workshop is going to be geared more towards what we need to communicate and what we need to note. So, I mean, and I could kind of focus more on the in-person. I mean, I think that people have on the online presentation, people aren't as nervous, primarily because they don't feel like everyone's looking at the slide. It's exactly what they are always hoping for, right? Because when they give live presentations, they're wanting you to look at it, and they're hoping they don't have to interact with you. So they kind of get what they wanted, right? And so they think they can do it. But now we're going back into in person. There's some expectation of engagement. And one thing I was thinking about, because I actually have to give a presentation on oral presentations in a week. And I have to go in and I have to wear a mask. So I haven't really put it in the slideshow, but I was just thinking about it. It's like, wow, how do we do it in the time of COVID now? Like, I'm speaking, how do I articulate? I mean, do I have to, I mean, I personally, I've never given a live presentation yet with a mask. So it's a new thing for me. So I'm really curious what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's so true.
It might change everything, because like they're going to have in classes people giving oral presentations with masks. So I'm not really sure how that's going to work.
It's really interesting, because my sister, just bringing that up, and with the masks, my sister is very introverted. Like she doesn't like to talk to people who she doesn't know. Like she does not like to do that. But what's interesting is she says she likes wearing the masks, because then it makes it not so like people can't see her. So it's almost like something for her to be able to hide behind. She's like, even if they make masks away, she's like, I'm probably just gonna still wear it because I like it that much. I'm like, okay.
That is so interesting.
Like, so that it's something that actually gives her confidence.
That's interesting.
Something because she feels like she can hide at the same time.
Yeah. Wow.
I wonder if that's gonna happen for people.
Maybe. It would be interesting to hear. This is a whole new area. Like, I told you, like, things are evolving in ways that nobody ever anticipated. And certainly in the world of oral communication, nobody's ever talked about presenting with masks, because we never had to do that. So this is just a novelty on its own. And I think we're just going to have to figure it out. But I think the ultimate goal is, regardless to what happens, you want to be able to try to and there has been a lot of people, they did make comments about, like, articulation is really important. Being able to project is important. Is that going to be affected by the mask? Probably. Maybe we need to articulate more. We'd have to project a little bit more than we think, because we have some barrier that's going to, like Marissa was worried for the essays, that are people going to be able to hear what the essays are saying, because it's muffled a little bit. But I've talked to a lot of people with masks, and I didn't have any trouble just on a regular basis, just talking. I mean, yes, it's a little bit muffled, but it's not that bad. So I think it's okay, but we'll see. Things will change maybe. But let me get started on this. I think it's going to answer a lot of the questions that you're asking, and I'm just going to share screen here. Okay. And you probably saw this before, and I just made some changes, some updates to it. And you can certainly take a look at it later on in the future if you want to look at it again, or if you want to remember, because there's a lot of information on it. So I do recommend, like, you download the slideshow, or take a look at it on your downtime, especially if you know that you're going to be doing work on oral presentations. it's a lot of things to remember. I'm hoping that some of it is going to stick with you, or at the very least, you're going to go, oh, I remember Sohui gave a presentation on it, and I can just like look back and refresh myself. So, you know, what I was talking about here, I'm just going to run through it, is that, you know, obviously we're going from live to in person, but then live again. It's like this backlash, you know, whiplash of live, and like, do people even remember how to give a live presentation? I think that's a big question. I don't know. Like, so there are some students who've never maybe given really full oral presentations, and they're not really thinking through all the components that go into it. So part of our job is to kind of help them become more aware of that. Okay. So we're going to be talking a little bit right now about, you know, how to prioritize those concerns, because there's always going to be a lot of concerns with online versus in-person presentations. Providing that feedback and recording on online and in-person. The common issues of online versus in-person presentations, and providing a feedback form, which I have. And I think, I don't know if you remember, but I had this online feedback form for oral presentations, which I probably think nobody used. I don't know if anyone used it.
Honestly, I think I forget about it because I don't get a lot of appointments for oral presentations.
Yeah.
So I think it's not always readily on my mind.
Yeah, and that's okay too. The reason why I'm going back to it is because if at some point you start doing it, and we used to do it a lot. I mean, this is prior to COVID and prior to you maybe really kind of working in our center. We used to give a lot of oral presentations. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like what Talia was talking about. It's like the students get something like to remember, and they can write down like what are, you know, and you can write down and really target what are things that you want to talk about in terms of like how they've constructed their argument and organized it, how they talked, you know, key points about delivery and key points about visuals. And that way you can open it and write comments as you're hearing it. But, you know, sometimes it's hard because if you have a group, then there's like multiple people that you have to make comments for, and that's kind of challenging. I usually write it on a sheet of paper, and then the students, when I used to do this, like I would write comments on the sheet of paper, and I go through each person and I talk about it. They always wanted the sheets, even though it's like my scribbles, which I didn't even think they can read, but they wanted it. Can I have that, please? I'm like, are you sure? Because you can't read this. So that's why I was thinking, you know, a form would be helpful because then they can actually read it. But, you know, it's up to you. You guys don't have to use it. I just think it might be helpful. And then, or maybe there's another way to do it. And if you have a better idea, Kiana, I am all ears, because I just, you know, I'm strapped for time. But checklist on online and in-person presentations, like what are key things that you want to remember? Okay, so those are the things, 4 things we're going to cover. Let's see if we do it. All right, so kind of going back to oral presentations, you know, if you have you done any oral presentation feedback?
I have, yeah.
What do you think, like if you went back to think about that one, what went well for your feedback, and what do you wish you did better on it?
Do you mean like one that I tutored, or one that I actually
one you tutored?
I think I think this is where I struggle, is when someone is so obviously not doing well. How do I, like, I need to tell them, hey, you need to speak up a lot more, or you need to speak a lot faster. You're going very slow. Or when I feel like I'm going to almost insult them, but I don't want to. I want to be honest with them, because that's how you would do it. I'm thinking back on the only one I can like think of right now, unfortunately. He was very slow, and he didn't have the confidence. He wanted to be able to read off of something, and his teacher told him he couldn't. So I just had to tell him, like, you need to just go through it and memorize it and really know your material enough that you can just talk about it. You don't have to read off of your slides, or you don't have to read off of, because he also had everything like on his, actually, I think we were still in like the outline portion at this point. Like he was just reading his outline, and I think it's just, preparedness. I think what usually goes well, getting them to give me their presentation will usually happen. But I think, to be honest, it's like, what do you wish you could improve in your tutorial sessions? Is just being able to be honest without them getting like, that was mean. I'm not trying to be mean, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I don't think you are. And I think that's the same issue people have with writing. But I think you found ways to talk about writing, like how do you improve your writing without being offensive? And I think you can do the same. But I agree that you have to be a little bit more sensitive with oral presentations because people do take it a lot more personally.
Yeah.
So but at the same time though, you are like a consultant and you're there to give objective advice. Sometimes it's helpful if you can record and then watch it and then they can hear it and they're like, oh
yeah,
look,
I have done that too.
yeah, so that often helps a lot. I usually do a lot of that recording, but if we don't have the time to do it and they're just walking through it, the walkthrough is not their full thing, so I might not prioritize that. That might not, what is really the issue here? Is speaking so the real issue, or are they really organized? Are they, so you have to kind of think about what you want to prioritize there, because I would say, even though speaking slowly is not a good thing, if is he getting all his points? Is it clear? Is it, is he, maybe not remembering? He doesn't know where he is and he's lost. And, that's, so those are kind of other things, right? So, yeah, and slideshows can be helpful, even if you don't put all your words in there, as signals to yourself in terms of remembering, this is the part where I really talk about this part, X part, and so I think that's going to be important. But yeah, I think, your job is to help them identify what their strengths are. And I would do the same thing as I do with writing, like identify, what you do really good at this. I found, and be specific, because it really shows that you're listening.
The compliment sandwich.
But then, it's the same thing. And then you follow it up with like, but here's where I think you can really do better. And this will really amp up your presentation, And so, when you're putting it in a way, like I'm here to help you find a way concretely to make it better. And I think they respond really well when you can show them very specific action that they can take to make it better, rather than just general kind of, points. Like, you need to be more confident. Of course you could be more confident, but there's a lot of things that you have to do to get that confidence, right? And, rehearsing to yourself, timing yourself, and actually recording it. And I often tell people, like, you should, like, just reading to yourself in your head is not a rehearsal. You actually have to speak it, because you can really, the pacing makes all the difference in terms of your presentation. And also you have to respect the presentation time. So if you're not making it within the presentation time, you can lose points, or you may not be even able to give that full presentation. So it's really important that you're editing and cutting it to fit that time. And so managing time is going to be really important. And I actually talk about it in this presentation. Okay. So anyways, prioritizing, number one. For me, I think it's like, that's the biggest challenge, right? Because like you have a presentation, you have tons of information, which, they already have trouble with that just with a paper, but they can finesse it more, right? With a paper, but with a presentation, usually being something between 5 to 10 minutes long. If it's a group presentation, it may be 15 to 20. But then you're working with groups, right? But if it's individual presentations, usually they ask for something like between 6 or 7 to, maybe 8 minutes, maybe 10 minutes max, right? How do you squeeze all this information? Or maybe they don't have a lot of information, they're just like fluffing it. So either way, it's like the lack of information, which they don't have, or too much information and they just like jamming everything in, right? And it's just not prioritized. And primarily that happens because of exactly what you said. They didn't rehearse it, they hadn't thought it out. Basically, it's a last minute thing that they just kind of effort at putting it together. And you can tell. I mean, that's what it is. They don't think delivery or presentation is that important, or is not as important as the research. The research is more important. And then, even though that's like, this is the final product, this is what people are going to determine whether or not you did a good job in your research. But they're not thinking that. They're thinking it's all about this content. And that's the biggest issue. So, ask about the assignment. I think this is always true with anything. Like, when is it due? How long is it? Is it like, what stage are you at? Are you in the outline stage? Are you drafting? Did you previously rehearse it? Did you get any feedback? All that stuff is really important, especially staging, because like, they may not be ready for a full rehearsal. Maybe they just want to walk through it. So timing is not the issue. Then it's really all about organization and getting the key points, not, overwhelming the present, the audience, and making sure you're speaking to the audience and that sort of thing. Is it, other things to worry about is like, is it an individual or group presentation? Sometimes I have students come in to see me and I think it's an individual presentation because it's one person. And then I find out, oh, this is part of a bigger presentation, right? And so, of course, I help them, but I say, oh, you know what? You should get the group to come in because you don't know how well you're syncing with them, right? It just, and they realize how important it is. And often, with group presentations, the biggest failure is that they didn't practice together.
Right.
Right? It's number one. I see it all the time. They just like put it together at the last minute, and then one person speaks too long. There's a lot of overlap. There's no cohesion in the slide. I mean, all those things that you see, right, in bad presentations because they just never rehearsed, right? And then do they need recording? So those are like the basics, right? Like, the technical stuff that as a tutor, you should be asking about just to set it up so you can start. This is how you prioritize, right? If it's due tomorrow, what are you going to prioritize, right? You can't like finesse like an argument and stuff, and you can't do any of that stuff. It's like, how do we just make it so that you can present it in time, right?
Right.
So you really do need to know these things to help prioritize that. And then, of course, well, what do they want to do, right? Right? Do they want to review the prompt, walk through? You should be doing that, but just at least glance through it, walk through or talk through it, review the slides, record the presentation, right? And then if you need to record it, remember that we do have like, and maybe they don't know this, right? But we do have that multi-literacy room, right? 1730, you guys can go in there, you can record. We have another space, which is in Broome. It's not the best place for recording, but we can do it. It's probably a good place just to rehearse if you just wanted to rehearse. Okay. And then, of course, prioritize based on time, issues of importance, and due date. It's always the case. Like, you can only do so much. No matter how many problems they have, this guy that speaks slowly, if it's due, in 2 days, it's a whole lot of difference than if it's due tomorrow. So, okay. So tips overall, I always do this. I mean, regardless of what it is, obviously they should have a rubric, but they don't always have a rubric. But if there's a rubric, you should look at it because faculty will say, this is what I'm looking for. And they usually have like a general thing about delivery, like eye contact.
Yeah.
And present confidence or something like that very generally. And you're going to have to extrapolate from that. Okay, this is what it really means, right? But for me, if they don't have any kind of rubric, I usually break it down the way I've evaluated you guys. Argument. And it's not so much that I'm evaluating whether or not this is good argument, but you can, as an audience member, is this compelling? Did they bring enough evidence? Right? Especially if it's an academic presentation. Normally, you have to bring evidence. You can't just make a whole bunch of claims, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, it depends on what kind of presentation. Like, again, if it's a Univ 100, like, this is me, I'm presenting myself, versus like a research capstone, it's going to be a whole different thing, right? But, is it compelling? Do they organize it well so we can follow it? Are they citing their sources? Are they explaining the tables, explaining the charts and things like that? Do they give really good, like if it's, online, obviously screen time, right? And oral delivery, you still have to give good oral delivery, not have a flat voice, should be animated, engaging, right? Because nobody wants to listen to someone drone on, right?
Right.
So I think that's still important. One thing I have as a tip that I didn't put in here that I think is super helpful, especially for online, I think about it this way. It's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever been told how to do a really good telephone interview. Did they ever tell you about that? Like, how do you give a good telephone interview? Because they don't see you, right? So should you be in your pajamas when you're interviewing for a really important job? No? Why not? Why shouldn't you be in your pajamas?
Well, first of all, even if you are on the phone, okay, well, I was gonna say if you were on Zoom, like, because then they can see your pajamas. But if you're on the phone, like, it doesn't give you as much confidence. Like, the what you wear actually has a huge effect on like how you're gonna behave.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of point that out because your tone, your voice, and everything. I mean, this is what they've been saying for a long time. I remember when I had like career kind of what do you call it, advice given to me, like when I was, and I did have, by the way, a job interview over the phone. I'm not kidding. For University of Hawaii. I was like a final candidate or something. They wanted to invite me to campus and stuff, and I was gonna. But anyway, so I had this. I wore my suit and everything. I was like, I was on because even though it wasn't live in person, I needed to project who I was, my personality, and they were going to make a judgment based on that, right? And so you really need to give it your all. And a lot of times, if you're not fully in that, your voice doesn't project that.
Yeah.
And so I also think that, like, even with slideshows, even though you're sitting there giving a slide, it's like, well, they can't see me. I think you should do the full Monty. You should be fully doing the gestures and doing that because it animates your voice. It brings you alive as opposed to somebody who's just sitting there and just reading the script. You can tell. I mean, I really think you can make it. You can really hear it, and you wanna think about that. I think there's certainly an advantage for some people who actually give a presentation standing. You know how they have the standing tables? I think there's an advantage there. I hate sitting and giving a presentation because it makes me feel really fixed and all that. But definitely, even with online, take that into consideration because they think they're not being watched on screen, so they just drop all the delivery component of it and they're just focusing on the slides. But the kind of, it's still with oral delivery, I think the voice is going to be a really component. I'm sorry? Oh, Kiana?
Okay, maybe I need to turn my camera off because I think my internet was unstable.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Okay. As long as you're here with me, that's all that matters. Did you hear what I said with that?
I didn't. It was cutting out so bad.
Oh, no. So, no, all I said was that even so that with online presentations, even though the camera is not with you, your voice still carries, kind of like that telephone conversation.
Yeah.
And I just recommend that you know, not necessarily that you have to wear a suit, but pretend or at least go through the action of giving that presentation. And with the gestures and all that, and I think that would help animate the voice.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? I think it helps a lot. Anyway, so when you're giving feedback, you know, I often tell them you really should have a hook. Hooks are, you know, when I used to teach this at Stanford, we spent a long time talking about hooks, perfecting the hook and all that. It's super important. And hooks are important because they connect us emotionally, intellectually to the topic. Yeah. And it doesn't mean to have a cheesy hook. That's not what I mean at all. A lot of presentations, even academic stuff, have hooks to it. And that hook is just a way for us to kind of connect. Like, you know, think about grant writing. When you write grants, well, you might not have written any grants, but I have, and I've looked at a lot of them. You know, they begin with presenting a problem. You know, which this research solves. And that's a hook. Do you see? I mean, a way for us to kind of understand, why is this so relevant? Why is this important? Why is this research important? And then how should we, you know, how does this particular work, you know, why is this so valuable that we should fund it, right? Yeah. And so that's what I mean by the hook. It's not like, you know, saying something like a you know, catchy phrase like you would do in an advertisement. So finding ways to kind of address your audience so they can really emotionally connect from the very beginning, or even intellectually connect with it, and have an understanding is important. And I suggest like adding that like before and after the title of the presentation. Yeah, kind of like a TED Talk. You see them all the time.
Yeah.
Right? They do that, and there's a reason for that. Again, it's like, especially with a general audience, people need to know why they need to care.
Right.
and that's what those hooks do. So types of hooks are like, like an anecdote. So I was driving the other day, and I came to, hear these TED Talks. They'll tell you a personal story, right, as a way of linking.
Like, where are you going with this?
Right, but then it connects, right?
Yeah.
Or facts or trends, something that happened maybe like just recently, headlines, general assumptions, universal problems. So those are all like different ways to kind of get people to say, oh yeah. And usually hooks are places where people already understand it. It's not like really disputed, right? Or it's just a kind of, here's something that happened, but then aha, here's, and you identify some kind of topic of importance, and they understand, oh, you're moving from point A where, yes, I agree, like these things are an issue, or this is something that happens to a lot of people, or it's funny that happens, to, oh, here's this, problem or challenge or something that needs to be addressed, right?
Yeah.
So they are moved to kind of understand, like, oh, this is something that needs to be listened to. I want to listen to it now. So it really kind of prepares the audience for that. I have to say, this is something that when I teach this at Stanford, like our students are totally into it. They know the value of it. And when I came to CI, I did feel like students really didn't know how to do it. And they seem more occupied with doing some of the real basics of presentation, and they don't do it very well. So I don't think they sell themselves very well. They don't sell their argument very well. And this could be, like if you found like someone gave a good presentation, just overall, this might be an area where they can like really kind of increase their style. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So maybe you feel like, oh, it's solid, they cover their bases and stuff, but maybe they can really develop like their hook, or they can do, so this would be an area for further improvement once they have kind of foundations that are solid. I definitely wouldn't prioritize this if they have other major issues,
Yeah.
But it's an important one. Like, at the end, it's like, it's the end it's a polish to a presentation. Okay.
Yeah.
So argument and organization, how should they articulate a clear statement of purpose or thesis? Well, how should they do it? What do you think?
I think it goes back to knowing what are they even talking about. If you know the whole basis of like the whole, like the main idea of what you're talking about, if you know the material in your research so well, this is going to come easily. If you don't know it, then that's when you say, okay, then maybe you need to go back and read your articles again.
Yeah, no, that is true. So they should be able to say it in one sentence, and they should be articulating that in their presentation. But you'll see that in a lot of presentations, they don't articulate it at all.
Right.
Like, and so you're sitting there listening to the presentation. It's like, what was the point? What's the point of this?
Yeah.
And let me tell you, the title of the presentation is not the thesis. So
Right.
I don't know, you've seen students do it. It's like, oh, today my presentation is this. And then they go in. Right? That's
Right.
That's not their thesis, but they think just reciting a title is their thesis. It's not it at all. So please, reading the title is not the thesis. You need to do more than that. They have to present the purpose of the presentation, present the results of the research, make a case, discuss a problem, blah, 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 right? They have to cover what they're doing, why they're here, and why does it matter. So my presentation is about, and they should really be explicit so that like there's a signal to your audience. One of the things, this is true with in-person or online, people don't realize like auditory listening is like the least that we have in terms of memory. Like we have really high visual memory, but auditory memory is kind of on the lower end of things. So people don't remember things, and that's why we have to repeat over and over again. So really explicit. The purpose of the presentation today, or my presentation's about, it sounds really horrible because like in writing, you would never do that, right? But in presentations, you want to be explicit. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry,
All
I forgot I was muted.
No, and that's okay. And also, you know what, Kiana, I can't see your face, so I can't see your expression.
Yeah.
I can't see if you're nodding or anything. So that's why I'm like, okay, I don't know if she's got it or not. Okay, all right, that's cool. But this is see, I'm learning from this too. So argument and organization. How should students provide roadmap and signposts to their intro and presentation? What do you think?
Definitely this. Again, it comes down to the prep work and the outline and the knowing like where you want to start and then where you want to end up and how did you get there and how did you come to that conclusion. Literally just thinking through that thought process of like knowing where you started, knowing where you ended, and just how did you get there, what or if it was a research thing, or just kind of going like how would you explain this to someone, write that out, and then figure out where are the good stop, in a sense, not stopping points, but like when do the new starting points happen, and making those your roadmap and signposts and all of that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So to do that, you actually have to have a big picture in mind, and you have to know your presentation very well, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't do that. You can't place those signposts if you don't know the length of that, right?
Right.
And the complexity of it. And the other thing I was going to say, I think your response is very good, is is articulation of it. It's kind of, again, I'm going back to Talia's point about headings. It's just that's essentially what it is. So signposting is like these verbal headings that we provide our audience members so they can hear like, oh, I'm in a new section. Now I'm going to talk about argument and organization. And, we just talked about hook, and now we're going to talk about this. And this is why we're talking about it. And remember, it's that repetition that I'm talking about. It's not just you repeating because you forgot something. It's you repeating because you're being strategic about having people remember these things, right? So roadmap can be spoken briefly in a sentence, like I'm going to talk about X, Y, Z in this presentation, or you can present it as multiple points to cover. Did I tell you my story about how I go into arguments with my husband?
No.
I used to argue all the time. Like I was like, I have 3 things to say about that. First, and I'm making this up as I go, by the way, because I don't know what my 3 points are, but I know I'm going to have 3 points now, right? But first, I don't like the tone of your voice. I disagree with you, blah, 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 blah. Second, so but seriously though, I mean, that's part of like calm, right? Communications, right? They tell you 3 points. You don't have to have 3 points. It could be more than that, but like essentially it's like you need to develop those points, right? But that's signposting. Like I'm going to tell you 3 points. Here's what they are. And the longer your points are, the more you have to signpost because people forget. So at the end, like of your 5th point, it's like, so my final point about this, is this, right? Do you notice how like there's that repetition, right? And you have to remind them, right? So you just have to verbalize those kind of things. And again, that's something that I think our students really don't do very well. They just kind of blah, tell us all this information, but it's not organized. So I don't know. How many points was that? Is this the 4th point?
Right.
Is the 5th point? What point is it? Where are we, right? And then the other thing is signposting, like if it's a group, like who's going next? Like I just finished and now I'm off. And then there's this stranger that's coming in and presenting, right? They need to kind of what I call pass the baton, right? So it's like, now that I finished with it, George is going to talk about X, right? You need to hand it off because you need to signal to people. Otherwise, it's a shock. Like all of a sudden he's stopping or she's stopping, right? And then finally, signposting just generally like in conclusion, to summarize, blah, blah, blah. Again, just like I'm going to give you my argument, the purpose of my presentation today. It has to be explicit. You have to signal because it's not like you're reading and it's ending because there's no more text underneath, right? I don't know. You could be talking forever for all I know. So we have to signal these things, right? And so again, that's something that I don't think students do very well. What about tutors supporting students' use of quality evidence? How can we help students provide quality evidence to support major claims?
I think asking them questions. I think a lot of times, like, because like with this question, what I quickly put myself in their shoes of like, if I don't have enough evidence to support my claim, I would need someone to ask me questions so that I can start thinking through uh, my thought process, right? I need someone to get me thinking to figure out, why do I think this? That's really what it is why do I think this? What evidence do I have that makes me come to this conclusion?
Right. And you know, another way to think about it too would be asking like, if I was a skeptical hippo. I'm sorry, I bring that up because my daughter has a violin teacher says skeptical hippo. I don't know where she gets that. Is that a meme or something? I don't know.
I don't
If
know.
I was a skeptical person, skeptical hippo, how would you help me be less skeptical about what you have to say?
Yeah.
I mean, especially if it's an argument, right? And especially if it's an academic argument, we need objective evidence to prove your point. And also, you need to explain it to me in terms of how you read it. This is the part of like what we call explication in English, right? But really, you need to explain how this connects. How does this piece of evidence connect to the claim you're making?
Right.
Right. And this is true. I was just talking to my daughter about this, like when, you know, because she was asking about like, you know, it was very interesting. I was driving in a car. She's like, okay, so if someone's guilty, but then someone's defending them, you know, what if they have like a lot of evidence to prove they're guilty, but, you know, how do you defend that? Right. So I was giving them all sorts of ways that they do it. Like they they question whether it's beyond reasonable doubt, whether or not the evidence can connect to the actual person, you know, all the circumstances where it may not be connected, or they can agree that it's them, but maybe they're crazy, you know, all sorts of stuff, right? There's a lot of different ways you can undermine, you know, claims like that, right? So like, how do you make sure that your argument is solid is really what it is. That's a responsibility of whoever's the rhetor, right? Whoever's giving the presentation, an argument, right? Yeah. And I do think that students are not very thorough in that. And your job is also to kind of think about, you know, they're making this major claim. Are they doing the best they can to support it by fully kind of, like if they have a chart, fully explaining how relevant that data is to the claim that they're making about it.
Right.
Right. So make sure there's enough evidence and explained and described. One piece of evidence usually is not enough unless it's like really a bombshell, right? Yeah. Citing the evidence vocally or on the slide, highlighting parts of relevant evidence to make sure that we understand that it's connected, remove anything that's interesting but irrelevant, then what we call the IBI, right? It's interesting, but totally not connected, right? And it's just distracting, it's just clutter, right? So stripping it off so that we can really focus on, this is quality evidence. I can be, it could be persuasive. And that is really important. So I think about evidence in terms of quality and quantity, and being able to make sure that it's explained sufficiently so that they can say, okay, I could see the connection there.
Yeah.
All right. So, I mean, these are like, again, like, you know, remember, it's not enough that you're just saying, I'm making this claim, I'm providing evidence. And that seems like, oh, that's solid. You seem to be doing that. Did they do it well enough? You know, Kiana, I have never seen a presentation here at CI or anywhere where I thought, this is so good, you don't need any more. You don't need to do anymore. I have to tell you, I've never experienced that ever. And I don't think I'm being hard on it. I'm just being a normal, objective observer who happened to be trained to kind of think about this in a, you know, more objective way. But a lot of people on the outside world, right, when you start actually giving presentations and stuff, they're not going to be on your side. They're not going to be sympathetic. They're just going to be like, well, I'm not compelled by this, right? So our job is to push it as far as you can. We're going to try to push you to be as good as you can be. Where can you go to kind of take it up to that next level? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure.
So, you know, I want to build our center to have that kind of confidence, to be able to talk to students. And by the way, I have to tell you, you know, as a side note, well, I'm being recorded. Maybe I shouldn't say this.
I think when in doubt, don't.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I think you guys are awesome. I think our tutors are incredibly articulate, far more than other tutors. Let me say, hint, hint. I think you guys are, well, because this is our area, right? It's communication.
Yeah, it's true.
And you guys are super articulate, and I'm so proud. Very, very proud of you guys. But now the question is, are you able to harness all of those skills and really provide kind of really concrete, practical feedback? Right. And again, a lot of it is not, again, remember all the things I'm talking about right here, these are not like personal in that way, right? It's like, here's what I'm seeing, here's what you can do. Very like doable things, but very kind of, you know, applicable kind of suggestions, right?
Right.
This is not about, you know, I mean, everybody has like weaknesses and strengths in oral presentations. I do myself. I know what my weaknesses are. And, you know, our ability is to be able to at least objectively, you know, because we're not the ones presenting, someone else's, like we can say, okay, I can see this. I could see what you're doing really well in, but here's some things that if you did this would really improve it, right? Mm-hmm. So oral delivery for online and in-person presentations, what should tutors look out for? So this is delivery component, mm-hmm. regardless to online or in-person.
I think what I would hope to see is someone, I don't know, I feel like there's like two different aspects to it. There's one of like whether or not I'm looking out for the confidence and knowing your subject well enough to speak at a good pace. Mm-hmm. I know I'm trying to compartmentalize and it's not working. I have, because it's like I'm looking for someone who I'm imagining someone in person, mm-hmm. and they're standing tall, they're standing straight, they're using their hands for mm-hmm. motions, they're showing like this is, you know, they're pointing to their slide, or mm-hmm. and they're looking back at the audience, they're not turning their back and staring straight at the screen, or the, you know, mm-hmm. The thing that the slides go on now, I forget what it's called. But they're, you know, they're being a little more animated. They're not just standing there, and they're not standing there with their arms folded. You know, it's a lot about body language. Yeah. That's what I'm looking for. I mean, even when you're online, you don't want to have your arms folded. You want to be looking at the screen. You want to be looking at the camera. Mm-hmm. And while you're not necessarily like pointing like with your hand at the slide, maybe you're using like some kind of pointer on the screen, or mm-hmm. You know, but using that signposting kind of thing. Yeah, I think that's what I would, I mean, that's also just like me thinking about how I would do one as well.
No, I think
everything, but
yeah, no, I think that's a great place to start. And everything you told me is, I think it's right. So I would say, you know, in a very simple way, do you remember long time ago when I don't know, maybe I didn't teach your class, Abby did.
Yeah, Abby did.
Yeah, I used to, I used to teach this to my Stanford students as well, the same thing. I used to show this graph. There was a study that was done, it was a long time ago, some decades ago, but it was really interesting. People's attention span during lectures and stuff. And, you know, there's a chart, you know, attention, you know, like how much, like, and time. Uh-huh. It's like this, right? And you know, it's like right here at the very start, the first minute, it's pretty high, above normal. And then within the first minute, it drops. I mean, and you're laughing because you know this is true.
Yeah.
Because your attention is high because in the very beginning, you're like, oh, what are they talking about?
Right.
Right? And then it's like, oh. And it drops, and then guess what happens at the end?
There's like none.
No, it goes back up again. It's not a slant like this.
Oh.
It goes like this, it drops, and it peaks a little bit, not as high as the very beginning, but it peaks a little higher. And the reason for that is because, we're ending. We're ending. maybe they have a final point, and I'm just going to remember that, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not kidding. So that is attention span, right? Like how people work, right? And so what I used to tell people is that, you know, this is a really valuable lesson. So one, this is why, like, when you have the hook and your thesis, it's so important that you articulate in the very beginning, because they may never hear it again.
Yeah.
You see, because the attention span is gone, and they may not hear what you have to say. Everything in the middle is like, you know, from Charlie Brown, wah 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 wah, right?
Yeah.
And that's it. And then you repeat your final kind of claim at the very end when their attention is up again, because they're going to remember that, right? So the most important, like strategically, opening and closing. And this is why, like with trial lawyers and stuff, they spend so much money on the opener and the closers. They're people who professionally, that's all they do. You focus on opening and closing arguments, especially like Supreme Court cases. They have lawyers specifically for that, okay? Because there's so much at stake. So this is not a joke about, you know, attention span and people remembering opening and closing. So that's one thing to just remember, how important those two things are, like the sandwiches at the very end. But the other thing is to remember that dip, and everything that you're doing in delivery is to fight the dip.
Yeah.
If you had one thing to remember, that is what it's about. The delivery is all about fighting that slide, that dip of attention. So, you know, eye contact, what is that about? You want them to pay attention to you so they don't dip, right? It's going to dip anyway, but you're trying to kind of, you know, prevent it from going too far. Your voice, why are you animated? You're trying to do that so that they continue to pay attention, they listen to what you say, and hopefully be persuaded, right? If they don't listen to you at all, they're not going to be persuaded because they didn't hear you, right? So that's just like the end all be all of all communication. So everything that we're talking about with gestures, hearing, speaking, whatever, all of that is about fighting that loss of attention span. I don't care how you do it, but obviously you don't want to be juggling or doing kind of really weird things. But it really is about like finding ways to this is what we call engagement. Finding ways to engage your audience. And I do think that that's really important. And no matter what media we're working with, whether it's online or what mode, right, online or in person or whatever, those are the things that we want to think about. Like, what do we do to kind of do that? So eye contact, I told you, camera versus people in the room. If you're in person, you definitely want to make eye contact because you're going to be losing people. If it's a huge stadium, obviously you can't make eye contact. You pretend to make eye contact. But if it's a small room, people know, and you want to engage them. On camera, you have to pretend, right? Because you really can't make eye contact, right?
Right.
I recommend like that 60-40 eye contact ratio, 50-50 if you can't do that. That just gives people an impression that you're looking at them more than looking at your notes or looking at your slides, right? Eye contact ratio with, you know, online, it should probably be there almost all the time. You guys could put notes and stuff right here so you can look at it, right? I mean, there's no excuse, right? The other thing is like the pacing and stuff. Again, this is people, they're, you know, when you have monotonous voices and stuff, people just, you know, tune out. So figuring out ways to do that. Also, like, you know, pausing strategically, like using, key, stressing certain words, things like that, underscoring with your voice. Those are things that are helpful.
Right.
So, again, think about the purpose of that. I'm more interested in you understanding the purpose behind it rather than like technically, oh, you should just go slower or you should go faster. Well, why is that an issue? Sometimes it's not really an issue, is it? What's really important? Are they engaging us?
Right.
Yeah, right? There are people who can speak slowly can still be engaging, I think. You don't have to have it fast, right? So, we got to think about like the big picture. Body language and stuff, that's the same thing, right? Like, you don't want distracting movements either. You want to be animated and engaged, but not so much so that it's distracting and they don't listen. Again, ultimately, it's about listening and paying attention. Intentional gestures, intentional movement, using of stage. That kind of advanced kind of public speaking stuff we haven't really addressed because a lot of the students don't have the fundamentals anyway. But at some point, hopefully we will.
Yeah.
I think another thing that you can always ask them about is like, just how are you going to dress? You know,
Yeah.
a lot of faculty complain that students don't know how to give a professional presentation. Like, it doesn't mean you have to wear a suit, but it does mean that you need to look like you're serious about it.
Yeah.
Right? So they shouldn't look like they just rolled out of bed in sweatpants. Right? No, I'm serious. Like, so they don't pay attention. And faculty get very offended when they see that, because they're like, you're just not serious. And this is true also, like with like actual real presentations in a business or job or something like that. You just want to think about, like, how does it project your ethos as an individual who cares about this, whatever it is that you're giving, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, all these things are important. I mean, I have information here about online stuff, which you're probably aware of. You seem very good at it. So I'm running out of time here. So I'm just going to say, like, on the slideshow, like, if you were to give feedback, you might have remembered what I talked about. Like, Abby might have given the slideshow that I made, which is about CPR. Again, I mean, a lot of what I talk about with oral presentations or like slideshow design is really about, like, what is your rhetorical goal? What do you want to achieve?
Yeah.
It's not about, like, you can't have a full sentence. I hate those things. Never use bullets. I don't say that. You can use some bullets, but is it the best way to communicate?
Right.
I don't know. All right. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Right. So, like, what are your options? Are you using, like, you know, so rhetoric is about, like, I have these options. I decide I'm going to do this because this is the best way to communicate it. Is it really? Did you really think it through? Is this the best way? And most of the time when I ask them, I'm like, oh, I haven't thought about it. That's just like default, right? So that means that you haven't, you know, it's not rhetorical, right? You're not strategically thinking, like, I could have had other options and I choose to do this. So as goals are concerned, like, if you design your slides, it should be so, like, it helps with comprehension of whatever concept or idea or, you know, list of things that you have, information. It should, or try to achieve persuasion, right? You know, rhetorically. Or it should be about memory, retention, like, so help them remember. So you might have things written on there so that people can remember, not you as a presenter, but other people, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, these are the kind of things that I talk about. So comprehension, if you have it, you're going to, you know, make sure that you do it. Oh, by the way, this is just slides that I kind of put in here because I think I added it for another presentation, but this is just facts that you might be fascinated to know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, visual content, people process it a lot more. It's much more dense, right? That's why people like it so much. And they remember it a lot better, as you can see with the status, right? Remember I told you about hearing, how we don't remember?
Yeah.
80% of what they see is remembered and retained versus 30% of what they read versus 10% of what they hear. That's why. But, you know, if you do a combination of those things, probably you got a better chance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like visual comprehension. So I usually say, like, this is a real slide from some government, from Georgia, the government of Georgia. And you can see, like, they have a lot of errors. You know, like capitalization errors.
Yeah.
But it's okay. But it's a real slide. And I just use this because I thought it was kind of funny. Like, they have it's a list of stuff, right? Like, you know, they're doing a chronology of something that happened. And a listing is not bad. It's better than bullets, I guess. But I don't see the purpose of it, and it's really hard to follow. And there's just a lot of information, right? So on one hand, it's not bad to read, right? Because the red is good contrast against the white, but, you know, is there a role? You know, what is the purpose of that list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? I guess that's an order, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard to remember. So maybe they could have done it differently, right? So this is where, like, in comprehension, like, you have a lot of text, lots of information. How did you want to visualize that or present that or organize this information in a way that's a little bit easier to follow? Here's another one that was online. It's a slideshow. It's horrible, but it's visualized. So it's like, look at the time stamp. Like, how do I read this?
Yeah, it's so small. And then, like, I can barely read the text over.
It doesn't make any sense because it goes from 7, 8, 12:30 to 7.
I didn't even see that at first.
I'm like, I don't understand this. It's not going. What is it doing? Yeah, so I don't know. It's really a horror. But they visualized it, right? So it's like a little bit more, but just visualizing isn't enough, right? This is a case where you're like, oh my God, really difficult to see. So the bad contrast, but also like the sequence, it makes no sense.
No,
Yeah, so
it literally goes in zigzags.
yeah, no, not. So the order of this is really poor, right? So that's something like to look out for too. Anyway, but ideally, when you're designing it, you shouldn't be doing it in that way. Make it. This is where like design over is like trumped over any kind of sense or information.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm running out of time, but you can look at this on your own where I kind of go through, some of these things. Not, I just want to kind of touch upon this. I do this a lot with students and they like it a lot. They like to be helped with, like, I have a presentation, it's about X minutes long. How do I organize that?
Yeah.
Right? Usually it's like, here's your introduction, background, whatever, your research or your argument content, and conclusion, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do I manage my time?
Right.
Well, do you know how to manage that time?
I feel like I would say I don't know. Maybe I don't. I think because I would just go about it. I would gather all my information. I'd make an outline,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'd practice it, and I'd decide, okay, I spent too much time on that, and then you know what I mean. Like I don't know that I would necessarily. I don't start with the time. I start with, okay, what information do I need to put in it, and then I practice it, and then I decide if it was too much
and that's
time.
not necessarily a bad way. It's not necessarily a bad way, but it will take you a lot more time.
Yeah.
So I would recommend this, right? So the object is you have 12 minutes. If you work backwards, you're like the meat of your sandwich, right? Is the research so far, or like like the argument part.
Yeah.
And that has to be about 5 to 6 minutes. That's like the big chunk. Your background and history can't be longer than that. And I would say probably you're setting up the argument, right? So maybe like 3 minutes. Okay. Then you have your introduction, a minute or 2 minutes. Your conclusion, a minute or 2 minutes. So when you add that all up, it should add up to about 12 minutes.
Okay.
See? And the reason why it's important to kind of have a rough sense, so you have an outline, like, and this is a really basic outline. This is not a detailed outline. Introduction, background, argument, and conclusion. When you have a sense of knowing, well, how much time do I really have? It's kind of like thinking about your pages. Like, how much, like, because a lot of the time what happens is that students spend way too much time on the background.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah.
Tons of information on background, and it's like almost as long as their argument, if not longer. And they really didn't need to do that, right? Mm-hmm. Like if they have a sense of like, oh, I'm only going to spend about 2 to 3 minutes on it, what can I really cover? It will give you a way to anticipate like how much do I really need, so that you're not overdoing it. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
It also helps organize, like if you're doing a group, so and so you're doing X, Y, Z, so you're distributing time and content equally, right? Like if one person takes over the argument and one does the background, it's not equal. Mm-hmm. Right? If you do it by section, it's just definitely not equal. Yeah, right? It's not. Yeah, so so those kind of balancing. I mean, for me, I actually do this like a short itinerary. I do this even for my workshops and stuff. It helps me understand like how much time do I want to spend, and then and call information accordingly. And then of course I go through and think about what I want to do, but it has to kind of be adjusted and adapted to fit.
Right.
Okay. So students do ask about that. They are very grateful when you help them work through how long you want to do it. But I always say work in the middle first, work with the key thing, the most important thing. And they know how to break it down after that. It's like, oh yeah, so if research is this long, then the background has to be this long, and so you really don't have a long time to do your introduction, right? You have to click through.
Yeah, you've got to get it done.
Right. Doesn't it give you a sense of like, your pace and how much you're going to cover and that sort of thing? Yeah. So anyway, that's always helpful. So the rest of this presentation, I'm going to stop this. I know I'm going over time. Oh God, where is this? If this is something of interest to you, I recommend like going through the rest of it. It does kind of go through like how do you record. You might already know how to do a Zoom recording, but it does do that. If you want to do it and just go through it, run through it on your own, Kiana, I'm happy to pay you for that time, because that is part of your training. So you don't have to, but if you're interested,
I've made a lot of Zoom recordings. I think
so you feel
that yeah.
Okay, great. So are you feeling fairly comfortable with what we just covered in terms of how to give feedback and all that?
Yeah, I am. I think I think it's funny because you were mentioning like the attention and then the not attention, the attention, but I think because I think I have seen this slideshow before, but I don't think I went to it last semester. I must have gone to it maybe like even last spring, because it seemed familiar, but it didn't seem like super familiar. And honestly, the most like the thing I'm probably going to take away is that little chart with like how to manage the time, because I don't know that I've ever thought about it in that way.
Yeah, no, I've never put that in my slideshow before. I
really liked that.
Yeah, I do it in my workshops when I give oral presentation workshops. And I do it for the class. So usually they have like an assignment that's like a 10-minute presentation assignment or group assignment. And then I tell them, okay, so you have 10 minutes. How are you going to break up your time? You have these parts. Like what's the components of a presentation? How many minutes do you have? And then when they see it, they're like, holy cow. I can't put too many claims in there, right? I can't, that means, everything that I said, which is like, you only have time to present two major arguments or two major points and then support it, right? Because look at the time. You can't like fluff it up in that way. And so they realize they have to be really pointed, and it does help a lot. So yeah, I think that's helpful. So definitely, if you have a time to talk to people about it, that would be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. I think that was the biggest takeaway.
Oh, well, thank you. At least you got something. I'm glad you got something.
Yeah, well, there you go. Thank you for adding it in.
Yeah, all right. Well, thanks, Kiana. You have a great evening, and thank you so much. You're an awesome tutor. I'm gonna miss you when you go.
I'm gonna miss it here.
But it's time for you guys to really explore and go in other places too. And do we can talk more about it later off record.
Off recording.
Off recording about your future and what you plan on doing and all that. So I'm excited for this semester. I'm excited for what we're gonna be doing, and it'll be fun. You have a Patricia Tabor for Soch 305, so definitely brush up on the ASA.
ESA?
ASA.
Oh, ASA. Is that what she uses?
Yes, it's sociology.
Okay. Well, when I did Soch 305 last semester, they were doing APA.
She is ASA. So, you'll meet her and you can talk about that. Yeah, some people do APA, but it should be ASA because it's sociology.
Cool.
Yeah. Cool. And she is very particular.
All right. Well, there you go.
She's a personality for sure.
Yeah. Awesome.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.